The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday. Crimson letters stamped across cheap paper like a death sentence. 72 hours to vacate or face forcible removal. Isabella Hayes stared at the document clutched in her trembling hand while Emma, her 8-month-old daughter, babbled innocently from the worn playpen in the corner. The late afternoon sun slanted through their studio apartment's single window, illuminating dust motes that danced like mockery above the stack of past due bills bleeding red across the kitchen table. Rent, utilities, student loans, medical bills from Emma's birth that still haunted her credit score like vengeful ghosts. 26 years old, and Isabella had become an expert at calculating impossible mathematics. Which bill could wait another week? Which creditor would accept another broken promise? How many hours she could work before exhaustion became dangerous? Her business degree from Northwestern gathered dust while she juggled 3 part-time jobs that barely covered diapers and formula. Pride was a luxury she'd surrendered somewhere between her brother Daniel's military funeral and Emma's first breath. The phone chimed. Another bill collector. Probably. Isabella almost ignored it. Then she saw the subject line. Exclusive catering opportunity. One night, $2. Her finger hovered over delete. Every survival instinct screaming scam. But desperation had taught her a different arithmetic. $2,000 would buy 3 months. 3 months was eternity when you measured survival in days. The email signature read Rivera Elite Events. Legitimate. She'd applied there 6 months ago. Back when hope still lived in her chest like something with wings. The message was clinical, professional. Emergency staff needed for private event. Saturday evening, Thornton Manor, owned by Mr. Victor Castellano. Requirements listed like military orders. Punctuality, professionalism, absolute discretion, no phones allowed on premises. Background checks mandatory. Isabella's hands shook as she read the compensation details. 50% advance deposit, already processed. She refreshed her banking app with the desperate urgency of prayer. The money was real. Her reflection stared back from the darkened phone screen. A woman who'd forgotten how to recognize herself. Hollow cheeks, dark circles carved beneath green eyes that used to sparkle with ambition. This wasn't who she'd planned to become. The girl who'd graduated summa cum laude, who dreamed of running her own hospitality empire, had died somewhere in the wreckage of Daniel's flag-draped coffin and a pregnancy that arrived like both blessing and curse. But that girl's daughter needed a mother who could keep the lights on. Isabella called every babysitter in her contacts. Each rejection landed like a physical blow. Mrs. Chen, visiting family, her cousin, working double shifts, agency sitters charged rates that devoured half the payment. The clock ticked towards Saturday with the inexorable march of execution. Emma gurgled, reaching chubby hands toward the stuffed rabbit Daniel had sent from overseas. His last gift before the IED that shattered more than just his body. Uncle Danny's bunny, Isabella whispered. Throat tight. He wanted you to have everything. Baby girl, everything I can't give you. The decision crystallized with the cold clarity of survival. Just this once. Just this one compromise. The event coordinator had mentioned staff quarters. A place where Emma could sleep safely while Isabella worked mere rooms away. Monitored, protected. What could happen at a birthday party in a mansion? She signed the electronic agreement without reading the fine print. Later, she would remember that moment. The exact second she traded safety for survival. Ignorance for necessity. Later, she would understand that some opportunities arrive wrapped in silk, concealing chains underneath. Later, she would learn that Victor Castellano never did anything without purpose. And his purposes were never simple. But on that Tuesday evening, with eviction looming and Emma's future hanging by threads, Isabella Hayes believed she was making a choice. She didn't yet understand she'd been chosen long before the email arrived. The confirmation chimed. Saturday, 4 p.m. pickup. A car would arrive. Isabella held her daughter close, breathing in that innocent baby scent, and whispered promises she desperately hoped weren't lies. The car that arrived Saturday at precisely 4 p.m. wasn't transportation. It was a predator wrapped in obsidian metal and bulletproof glass. Isabella froze on the cracked sidewalk, Emma strapped against her chest, watching the Mercedes idle with mechanical silence that screamed money and danger in equal measure. The driver emerged like carved stone, Broad shoulders, salt and pepper military cut. Eyes that assessed threats with surgical precision before settling briefly on Emma. "Is there a problem with bringing my daughter?" Isabella's voice cracked despite her determination. The coordinator said, "No problem, Miss Hayes." His Eastern European accent made each word feel weighted, deliberate. He opened the rear door without further explanation. Leather seats whispered luxury Isabella had only glimpsed through magazine pages. Emma cooed, tiny fingers reaching for polished wood trim worth more than their monthly rent. Tinted windows transformed Chicago into shadow theater as familiar streets gave way to neighborhoods where poverty became distant memory. 23 silent minutes. Then the gates materialized. Wrought iron rose 15 feet. Intricate metalwork forming thorny vines around a central crest. An ornate sea that watched their approach with aristocratic judgment. Security guards emerged from stone pillars, hands resting casually near concealed weapons. One checked credentials with border control thoroughness. Another circled the vehicle with an inspection mirror, searching for threats Isabella couldn't fathom. What birthday party required this level of security? The gates swung inward. Thornton Manor sprawled before them. Weathered limestone, soaring columns, windows reflecting sun like knowing eyes. Gardens stretched in geometric perfection. Marble statues frozen among flower beds that probably employed dedicated staff. Fountains danced. Peacocks strutted with the arrogance of creatures who'd never known predators. This wasn't wealth. This was empire. The driver navigated toward a discreet side entrance. Staff entrance. Know your place. A woman waited. 50s. Steel gray hair weaponized into a severe bun. Wearing a suit that cost more than Isabella's college textbooks. Her eyes held January Lake Michigan's warmth. Charlotte Winters, head of household staff. No pleasantries. She examined Isabella's ID like it might contain lies. Follow me. The corridor smelled of beeswax and generations of accumulated wealth. Their footsteps echoed on marble polished to mirror brightness. Oil paintings depicted stern-faced men sharing certain features, sharp jawlines. Calculating eyes. Predator bearing in gentleman's clothing. Charlotte stopped at an unmarked door. Staff quarters for your situation. Isabella's breath caught. A portable crib waited, already assembled. Changing table stocked with supplies. Formula containers lined the counter. Emma's exact brand, the expensive hypoallergenic kind Isabella could rarely afford. Baby monitor with dual cameras. A small refrigerator hummed quietly. Someone had prepared for Emma specifically. How did you know? Isabella's hands trembled as she settled Emma into the crib. Mr. Castellano is thorough. Charlotte's expression remained granite. 30 minutes. Change into your uniform. Ballroom service begins at 5 sharp. Do not be late. The door closed with soft finality. Isabella stared at the baby monitor. Her reflection ghost pale in its screen. Every detail. The formula brand. The crib model. Emma's sleep schedule. Suggested surveillance far deeper than any background check warranted. Someone had been watching them for much longer than a job application explained. Emma sighed in sleep. Innocent and trusting. Isabella kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized were falling. Everything's going to be okay, baby girl. But standing in that perfectly prepared room, Isabella Hayes understood with bone-deep certainty. Nothing about this evening would be okay. The formula containers gleamed under fluorescent light. The baby monitor blinked its red recording eye. The crib waited with the patience of something that had known Emma would arrive. This wasn't coincidence. This was calculation. And somewhere in this fortress mansion, Victor Castellano was waiting. A man who knew her daughter's formula brand, her desperate circumstances, her brother's sacrifice. A man who had orchestrated this moment long before Isabella believed she was making a choice. She changed into the crisp uniform hanging in the closet, somehow her exact size, and prepared to serve champagne to people who lived in worlds she'd only imagined. Isabella Hayes didn't yet understand she was the real guest of honor at this party. But she would. Soon. The ballroom didn't glitter. It devoured light and transformed it into weaponized splendor. Isabella stepped through the service entrance. Silver tray balanced against her hip, and felt wealth press against her skin like atmospheric pressure. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings painted with Renaissance frescoes. Silk drapes pooled on marble floors that reflected guests like accusatory mirrors. Flower arrangements cost more than Isabella earned annually. The guests moved through this magnificence like they'd been born to it. Women draped in couture, diamonds catching light at throats and wrists. Men in bespoke suits cut to display power as clearly as military uniforms displayed rank. Their laughter held the particular music of people who'd never questioned whether they deserved everything they possessed. Isabella felt invisible. Good. Invisibility was survival. Charlotte's instructions had been surgical. Zone 3. Champagne service only. Replenish every 12 minutes. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. Do not approach the East Terrace without explicit summons. The East Terrace, where certain men gathered, conversations dropping to whispers whenever staff approached. Isabella watched from her position, noting patterns. These weren't ordinary socialites. They carried themselves differently. Shoulders back, eyes constantly scanning, hands moving with the economy of people trained to react instantly to threats. Security, or something pretending to be. One silver-haired man caught her attention. 60s, wearing a suit worth more than her defunct car. He spoke into his phone with clipped authority. But his eyes never stopped cataloging exits, assessing threats, protecting something precious. Or someone. Champagne? Isabella offered her tray to women discussing vacation homes with the indifference of people choosing between shoes. They took glasses without acknowledgement. She didn't exist to them. The baby monitor remained quiet. Emma sleeping peacefully, unaware her mother stood in a ballroom worth more than 100 lifetimes of struggle. Then the room changed. Not loudly, simply. The air itself shifted. Conversations faltered. Bodies turned like compass needles finding magnetic north. He stood in the main entrance. Tall, 6'3", broad shoulders filling a charcoal suit tailored with armor's precision. Dark hair silvering at temples. Sharp angles, strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten smiling decades ago. And eyes, dark and depthless as winter midnight, holding intelligence that felt predatory in its surgical intensity. Victor Castellano. She knew without introduction. This man owned everything surrounding them. The mansion, the security, the guests who rushed to pay respects with the urgency of subjects before kings. Daniel's friend, her brother's final promise, the man who'd been watching her apartment. Those dark eyes swept the ballroom with a general's assessment. They catalogued exits, noted security positions, dismissed fawning guests with absolute indifference. Then they found Isabella. Time crystallized. Champagne flutes trembled on her tray. She should look away. Charlotte's warnings echoed, but something in his gaze held her paralyzed. Recognition flared in those depths. Not surprise, not curiosity. Certainty. He'd known she would be here. Expected it, orchestrated it. The baby monitor erupted. Emma's screams tore through the earpiece with infant terror. High-pitched, panicked. The sound a mother's biology was designed never to ignore. Waking alone in strange darkness. Frightened, needing her. Isabella's tray tilted. Champagne flutes clinked dangerous warning. The ballroom spun. Chandeliers wheeling like carousel lights. Marble floors rising to meet her. Victor Castellano's face the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her. She fell. Strong hands caught her before marble could shatter more than crystal. "I've got you," a voice murmured against her hair. Deep, accented, carrying the weight of promises kept and debts about to be collected. "I've always had you." Isabella Hayes. Then nothing. Only darkness, and Emma's distant cries, and the certain knowledge that when Isabella woke, her life would be divided forever into before and after this moment. The moment she stopped running from destiny she'd never known was hunting her. Consciousness returned slowly, sensations filtering through fog, silk sheets beneath her fingertips. Cool and expensive, sandalwood cologne, masculine and overwhelming, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't her cramped apartment with second-hand furniture. This was wealth beyond comprehension, luxury that felt hostile in its perfection. Memory flooded back, crystal chandeliers spinning, dark eyes that had known her, Emma's screams through the baby monitor, falling, and strong hands catching her. Isabella bolted upright, heart hammering. Emma, my baby. Where's Emma? She threw back the covers. Her uniform replaced by silk nightgown she'd never seen, raising alarming questions about who had undressed her unconscious body. Panic drove her toward the door on trembling legs. The door swung open, revealing Charlotte's stern face. Mr. Castellano requests your presence in the morning room. Where's my daughter? Isabella's voice rose with desperation. I'm not going anywhere until I see Emma. Charlotte gestured down the hallway. Isabella pushed past her, barefoot and frantic, following the sound every mother's biology was programmed to recognize. That familiar laugh that meant safety, happiness, contentment. The giggles led her through corridors lined with artwork worth fortunes, past antique furniture and Persian rugs, until she reached an open doorway revealing a sunlit room filled with toys. In the center sat Emma, happily stacking colorful blocks, completely unaware of her mother's terror-filled night. But what stopped Isabella's breath was the man seated beside Emma on the plush carpet. His charcoal suit somehow still pristine, one hand resting protectively on Emma's back as she reached for another block. Victor Castellano looked up, his dark eyes meeting Isabella's with intensity that felt like physical touch. Mine now, he said quietly, his hand more firmly on Emma's back, simultaneously protective and possessive. Isabella's legs nearly buckled as rage and terror warred for dominance. You can't just take someone's child, she whispered, controlling her volume to avoid frightening Emma. I already have, Victor replied conversationally, helping Emma balance another block. And legally at that, the paperwork giving me temporary guardianship was among the documents you signed yesterday. Isabella's mind raced through the forms she'd hastily approved, remembering fine print she'd skimmed in desperate need for payment. That's not possible, she insisted, though doubt gnawed at her certainty. You'll find I rarely deal in impossibilities, Miss Hayes, Victor said, rising smoothly without disturbing Emma's construction. Only inevitabilities. The marble floor felt cold beneath Isabella's bare feet as she calculated options. The distance to Emma, the likelihood of reaching her before Victor reacted, the unknown number of staff who might intercept them. Your confusion is understandable, Victor continued, moving to a sideboard where he poured amber liquid into crystal. Perhaps reviewing our connection will clarify matters. He gestured to a leather portfolio on a nearby table. Isabella cautiously approached and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens showing her brother Daniel in military uniform standing beside Victor. Both younger, both smiling with the easy camaraderie of men who trusted each other with their lives. Daniel saved my life in Kandahar, Victor explained, watching her reaction. He extracted my team when no one else would attempt the rescue. Before he died, he made me promise to look after his family. You and Emma. Isabella's fingers trembled as she touched the images. Memories of Daniel's vague references to a friend with resources suddenly taking on new meaning. He never told me who you were, she whispered, trying to reconcile this information with the man before her. Your brother understood discretion, Victor replied, his voice softening slightly. He knew my position made open association dangerous for those I care about. Isabella finally looked up from the photos, studying the man who claimed this connection to her brother. And what position is that exactly? She asked, already suspecting the answer from whispers she'd overheard at the party. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Let's say I manage certain business interests that operate in regulatory gray areas. My associates call me Il Protettore, the protector. The euphemism might have been amusing if not for the deadly seriousness with which he delivered it. So you're a criminal, Isabella challenged, her fear gradually being replaced by indignation that felt safer than terror. And you think that gives you the right to trick me? To take my daughter? I think Daniel's death gives me an obligation, Victor corrected, his tone hardening slightly. One I've neglected for too long while having you watched from a distance. Your eviction notice last week forced my hand. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. The letter had arrived just days ago. The red letters stamped across cheap paper like a death sentence. How could he possibly know about it unless he'd been monitoring her life with disturbing intimacy? The invasion of privacy was as disturbing as the abduction itself. This arrangement is temporary, Victor continued, glancing at Emma, who was now happily examining a stuffed elephant larger than herself. Until you're properly established with suitable housing and sustainable income. I have several legitimate businesses that could use someone with your qualifications. My qualifications? Isabella repeated incredulously. You don't even know me. She backed away from the portfolio, needing distance from the evidence of a connection she hadn't known existed. From the proof that her brother had entangled her life with this dangerous man before his death. Victor crossed to an elegant mahogany desk and retrieved another file. This one considerably thicker than the first, suggesting research that had taken considerable time and resources. Bachelor's degree in business administration, minor in hospitality management. He began, flipping through pages with disturbing familiarity. Exceptional references from your internship at the Harrington Hotel before Emma's birth forced you to leave. He turned another page, his dark eyes scanning information that should have been private. Your student loans total $87,000. You've been working 3 part-time jobs since Daniel's death covered his share of your mother's hospice care. The clinical recitation of her life's struggles hit Isabella like physical blows. Each detail a violation, each fact proof of how thoroughly he'd invaded her privacy. Stop, she commanded, surprised when he actually complied, closing the file with deliberate care. This isn't protection, it's stalking. Protection requires information, Victor countered, his voice remaining calm despite her accusation. I've respected your independence as long as possible, but your situation has become untenable. Daniel would never forgive me for allowing his niece to live in such precarious circumstances. A memory suddenly surfaced in Isabella's mind, sharp and clear. The baby formula in the staff quarters had been Emma's preferred brand. The expensive hypoallergenic kind she could rarely afford. Impossible to know without detailed surveillance extending far beyond a simple background check. The job offer was never real. Was it? She asked, the full extent of the manipulation becoming clear. You orchestrated everything to bring me here. Victor had the decency to look slightly abashed. A crack in his armor of absolute control. The payment was real. The need to observe you up close was also real. I needed to confirm my reports about your character before bringing you into my home. Before trusting you with information that could destroy everything I built. Reports from who? Isabella demanded, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Mrs. Chen's convenient absence. Her cousin's sudden unavailability for babysitting. The way everything had aligned to force her into this impossible situation. Had Victor manipulated those circumstances too? Instead of answering directly, Victor crossed to a built-in bookshelf and pressed something that caused it to slide sideways with mechanical precision, revealing a hidden surveillance room that looked like something from a spy thriller. Multiple monitors displayed camera feeds from throughout the mansion, security systems sophisticated enough to make government agencies jealous. But one screen showed footage Isabella recognized with a gasp that felt like a punch to her chest. Her own apartment building's hallway. The worn carpet and flickering fluorescent lights achingly familiar. You've had someone following me, she whispered, horrified by the violation, by the systematic invasion of every aspect of her life. For how long? Victor's silence was answer enough, and fury propelled Isabella forward until she stood directly before him, fear temporarily forgotten in the face of righteous anger. I want to speak to my brother's commanding officer, Isabella demanded, grasping at the one person who might verify Victor's claims, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. I need to confirm this supposed promise before I believe anything you say. Victor's expression shifted subtly, respect flickering briefly across his features like sunlight through storm clouds. Captain Reynolds is expecting your call, he said, offering his phone with the casual confidence of someone who had already anticipated this request. He'll confirm everything. The 10-minute conversation that followed demolished what remained of Isabella's worldview. Captain Reynolds spoke with clear admiration of both Daniel and Victor, confirming they'd served together in a classified special operations unit before Victor returned to family obligations in the States. Your brother made Victor swear on his life to protect you both if anything happened to him, Reynolds explained, his voice crackling over the secure line with the weight of absolute certainty. He's a man of his word. Isabella, you can trust him with your life. Daniel certainly did. As Isabella ended the call, she felt the weight of her brother's final decision settling over her like a shroud. Daniel had entrusted her safety to this man, believing it was the right choice. But could a promise made in a war zone justify what Victor had done? Could loyalty to a fallen soldier excuse kidnapping his sister and niece? 3 days passed in luxurious captivity, with Isabella mapping the mansion's routines while pretending to accept her situation with the docility Victor seemed to expect. The estate operated like clockwork, each movement choreographed with military precision. Guard rotations at midnight and noon, delivery trucks on Tuesdays and Fridays, staff meetings every morning at 8. Victor had been unexpectedly absent, called away on urgent business the morning after their confrontation. This temporary reprieve gave Isabella the space to plan, watching and waiting for the perfect opportunity while spending her days with Emma in the lavish nursery that felt increasingly like a gilded cage. The security system was sophisticated but not infallible. Isabella had noticed the east garden door remained unlocked for exactly 7 minutes during the gardener's morning routine. A brief window when old Marcus would prop the door open while he transported supplies from the greenhouse. 7 minutes. Barely enough time, but potentially enough for someone determined to slip away undetected. Isabella befriended Elena, a young housekeeper who seemed less intimidated by Victor than the other staff, whose eyes didn't carry the same fear that clouded the expressions of Charlotte and the security personnel. Through careful conversations over folded laundry and arranged flowers, she learned that Elena's brother worked as a taxi driver who sometimes picked up staff from the mansion service entrance. He could take you into the city for a reasonable fee, Elena had offered innocently during one afternoon conversation, unaware of Isabella's true intentions. If you ever need to run errands while Mr. Castellano is away. Isabella memorized the phone number Elena provided, waiting until Wednesday night when security would be focused on the weekly wine delivery. A ritual that required multiple personnel to verify and transport cases worth more than most cars. The mansion's landline in the library would be her only chance to make the call without surveillance. Her only opportunity to arrange escape before Victor returned and tightened security further. At precisely 10:43 p.m., she slipped from her bedroom with Emma bundled against her chest, a small bag of essentials hidden under the baby's blanket. The hallway stretched empty before her, dimmed lights casting long shadows across marble floor that gleamed like ice. Every footstep seemed to echo with accusatory volume. The library door creaked slightly as Isabella eased it open, heart hammering so loudly she feared it would wake Emma. 3 quick strides brought her to the antique desk where the phone sat like a beacon of freedom, her only connection to a world beyond Victor's control. Elena's brother answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but agreeable. He confirmed he could meet her at the service gate in 20 minutes. Long enough for her to navigate the dark corridors and reach the east garden door during its brief window of vulnerability. Isabella replaced the receiver with trembling fingers, turning to find the library no longer empty. Going somewhere? The voice came from the shadows near the doorway. And Marco, Victor's security chief, stepped into the dim light, arms crossed over his chest. His expression revealed nothing, but the phone in his hand suggested he'd already alerted his employer, that every word of her escape plan had been monitored and recorded. Just looking for a book to help Emma sleep, Isabella lied, clutching her daughter closer, the excuse sounding hollow even to her own ears. She's been fussy tonight. The practiced deception felt transparent as Marco's impassive gaze dropped to the bag partially visible beneath Emma's blanket, to her outdoor shoes instead of house slippers, to the coat draped over her arm. Your loyalty to Elena is misplaced, Victor said hours later, after Marco had escorted Isabella back to her suite with the firm but gentle grip of someone accustomed to handling flight risks. He sat across from her in the sitting room adjoining her bedroom, where Emma now slept peacefully in the adjoining nursery, unaware of her mother's failed escape attempt and the consequences that might follow. Dawn was breaking outside the windows, painting the sky in watercolor streaks of pink and gold that belied the tension filling the room with almost physical weight. Victor looked exhausted, his usual immaculate appearance slightly rumpled, as though he'd traveled through the night to return after receiving Marco's call. The charcoal suit jacket was gone, replaced by shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that spoke of a violent past. She was following my instructions, he continued, watching Isabella's expression shift from defiance to confusion to dawning horror. Testing your resourcefulness, your determination to protect your daughter at any cost. Isabella's anger flared hot and immediate, burning through the exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead. You set me up, made me think I had a chance to escape just to see what I would do. The cruelty of such manipulation seemed excessive, even for a man who had orchestrated her abduction, who had systematically invaded every aspect of her privacy. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped before him in a posture that looked almost penitent. I needed to be certain of your character before making my final offer, he said, his voice losing its usual commanding edge, replaced by something that sounded almost vulnerable, almost human beneath the crime boss exterior. I don't want any more of your offers. Isabella spat, wrapping her arms around herself as though the gesture could provide protection from whatever was coming next. From whatever new manipulation Victor had planned. I just want to leave with my daughter. I want to go back to my life, difficult as it was. Victor nodded as though he'd expected nothing less, as though her resistance was simply another variable he'd already calculated and prepared for. What if leaving with Emma included a new identity, a house in any city of your choosing, a trust fund for her education, and enough money to ensure you never need work again unless you choose to? Isabella's retort died on her lips, suspicion replacing anger like ice water through her veins. Why would you do that? She asked, eyes narrowing as she studied his face for deception. What could possibly be worth that level of generosity to someone you barely know? There had to be a catch, some hidden cost that would make the price far higher than any amount of money could justify. Because you're exactly the person Daniel described, Victor replied, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a folded letter that showed signs of frequent handling. The creases worn soft from being opened and read countless times. The letter he left in case of his death describes you as fiercely protective, stubbornly independent, and incapable of being bought. He placed the letter on the table between them, Daniel's familiar handwriting visible even from where Isabella sat, each loop and stroke achingly recognizable. Read it, Victor encouraged, sliding it toward her with careful fingers. Then you'll understand why I need someone exactly like you. His voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. Something beyond the commanding authority. Something that sounded almost like desperation. Isabella hesitantly took the letter, her brother's words blurring through unshed tears as she read his final message. His love for her and Emma, his trust in Victor, and most surprisingly, his hope that she might someday help his friend find what he called a life beyond the family business. The letter painted Victor not as a monster but as a man trapped by circumstances, by legacy, by obligations that had stolen his choices before he'd been old enough to make them. I don't understand, Isabella said, looking up from the letter in confusion, trying to reconcile Daniel's words with the man who'd kidnapped her. What does this have to do with your proposition? What could I possibly offer someone like you? Victor stood and moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the brightening sky, shoulders carrying burdens she couldn't begin to imagine. I have a son, he stated simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a confession. An 11-year-old boy whose mother died in childbirth, who has known nothing but the shadows of my world, who needs a path different from mine. You want me to raise your son? Isabella asked incredulously, the pieces finally falling into place with horrifying clarity. That's why you brought me here. Why you've been watching me. To be what? His nanny? His governess? Some kind of replacement mother? Victor shook his head, his expression more serious than she'd yet seen it, a gravity that suggested this was the real reason for everything that had happened. I want you to be his guardian if anything happens to me. Which is increasingly likely given certain recent business developments. He turned from the window to face her directly. There are rumors of an impending RICO investigation targeting our entire operation. Federal protection for anyone willing to testify against me. The FBI has an informant in my organization. My rivals sense weakness. My lieutenants grow restless. In my world, Victor continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, leaving my son without clear protection is tantamount to signing his death warrant. My enemies would use him as leverage or eliminate him entirely to prevent any future claims to my territory. The casual way he discussed these horrifying possibilities created a dissonance Isabella couldn't reconcile. The contrast between cold assessment and obvious love for his child. Lorenzo's mother was not involved in my business, Victor added, a softness creeping into his expression that transformed his entire face. She was a concert pianist I met in Milan. She made me promise before she died that he would have choices she and I never had. You should know there's a time limit to consider, Victor added, his tone regaining its business-like edge, the vulnerability disappearing behind the mask he wore to survive in his dangerous world. My sources tell me the FBI plans to move within 6 weeks, which means our window for establishing Lorenzo's new guardian situation, with or without you, closes rapidly. The threat wasn't subtle. It was simply reality presented without embellishment. He returned to his seat, retrieving a tablet from the side table and sliding it toward Isabella with careful precision. On the screen was a photo of a solemn-faced boy with his father's eyes, but a gentleness to his features that Victor lacked, a softness that suggested he hadn't yet been hardened by the world his father inhabited. He's currently at a boarding school in Switzerland under an assumed name for his protection, Victor explained, his voice carrying a weight of grief that no amount of control could fully mask. He comes home only 3 times a year, and each time I see him pulling further away from me, becoming more isolated, more withdrawn. Isabella touched the screen gently, something in the boy's expression tugging at her heart in ways she hadn't anticipated. There was loneliness in those young eyes, a desperate need for connection that she recognized from her own childhood in foster care, from those years of being passed between families who saw her as obligation rather than gift. There's a compound in Vermont, Victor continued, pulling up blueprints on the tablet that showed a property far more extensive than Isabella had imagined. Remote, self-sufficient, with security systems that would rival most military installations, yet appearing to neighbors as nothing more extraordinary than a private estate. The property featured sprawling grounds, a lake that glittered in aerial photographs, and facilities that would allow Lorenzo to pursue any interest. Music studios for the pianist's son, athletic fields for a growing boy, workshops equipped with tools for building, creating, discovering, and a library that made Isabella's heart skip a beat. Floor-to-ceiling shelves visible through the blueprint's detailed renderings. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. I've established shell corporations and trust funds that can never be traced back to me, Victor explained, scrolling through documents that represented years of careful planning. Layers of protection built with the same strategic thinking he applied to his criminal empire. Your background in business administration would be essential for managing these assets, for maintaining the facade of legitimacy that would protect Lorenzo from anyone seeking to use him against me. Isabella's mind raced with possibilities she'd never considered. Raising 2 children in luxury and safety, but always looking over her shoulder, always wondering when the past might catch up to them, when Victor's enemies might discover the truth despite all these elaborate precautions. Was this truly better than the struggle she knew? The honest poverty that at least came without bloodstains? If I agree to this arrangement, Isabella said slowly, surprising herself with the condition that formed before she'd consciously decided to speak it. I'd want complete authority over his upbringing. No interference from your organization. No attempts to groom him for the family business. No shadowy figures teaching him things an 11-year-old boy shouldn't know. Victor nodded without hesitation, the speed of his agreement suggesting he'd anticipated this demand. That's precisely what I want. Someone who will stand up to me when necessary. Who will put his well-being above my wishes or business concerns. Who will give him the childhood I never had. And Emma, Isabella pressed, needing absolute clarity on this point before she could even consider his proposal. She would remain with me under the same protections. We would never be separated. Not by your organization. Not by legal maneuvering. Not by anything. You and Emma would be family. Victor stated with finality, protected as such by all the resources at my disposal. I need to meet Lorenzo first, Isabella said finally, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was considering. The life-altering decision that couldn't be unmade once the path was chosen. Before I make any decisions, I need to know if he and I could form a genuine connection. If this could be something real rather than just a transaction. I won't become his guardian based on paperwork and promises alone. Already arranged, Victor replied, checking his watch with the efficiency of someone accustomed to orchestrating complex logistics on short notice. The helicopter leaves in an hour. We'll be in Geneva by evening. And you'll have 3 days with Lorenzo before deciding. His confidence suggested he'd anticipated her condition, had already made preparations before she'd even articulated her terms. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the room in golden light that seemed to illuminate the crossroads at which Isabella stood with painful clarity. Behind her lay the life she'd known, struggling but independent, honest poverty where she answered to no one, where her choices were her own even if her options were limited. Ahead stretched a future entangled with a dangerous man and his vulnerable son. Wealth beyond imagination but purchased with compromises that might cost more than money could measure. "This isn't what Daniel would have wanted for me," Isabella said softly, looking down at his letter once more, tracing her brother's handwriting with trembling fingers. "Getting involved with your world, the risks that come with it, the moral compromises. He wanted me safe, but he also wanted me free." Victor's expression softened for the first time since she'd met him, the armor of absolute control cracking enough to reveal genuine emotion beneath. "Michael wanted you safe, happy, and able to provide for Emma," he said quietly, using her brother's nickname with the familiarity of true friendship. "Beyond that, he trusted your judgment more than anyone's, including mine. He believed you would make the right choice when the time came. Whatever that choice might be." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Emma's babbling came through the monitor on the side table, the happy sounds of a baby waking refreshed and content. Isabella rose automatically, her motherly instincts overriding all other concerns. The fundamental need to respond to her daughter's needs more powerful than fear or anger or confusion. "I'll think about it during the flight," she said, moving toward the bedroom where Emma waited, where innocent eyes would look at her with absolute trust, believing mommy could fix anything, solve any problem, keep them both safe no matter what storms raged beyond their small circle of two. Victor remained seated, watching her with an expression that had shifted from commanding to hopeful. From crime boss to desperate father seeking salvation for a son he loved but couldn't protect within the confines of his dangerous world. "That's all I ask," he said quietly, the mask slipping further to reveal vulnerability he rarely showed. "Thank you." The words hung between them as Isabella lifted Emma from the crib, breathing in that innocent baby scent, that promise of tomorrow and possibility and futures not yet written. Through the window, she could see the helicopter on the distant lawn, rotors beginning their slow rotation, preparing for a journey that would either save 2 children or doom them all. "What do you think Sophie will decide?" The question echoed in Isabella's mind as she packed Emma's essentials with practiced efficiency. Would she choose safety purchased with compromise? Would she walk away from Victor's dangerous offer and return to honest struggle? Or would she find some third path, some way to honor Daniel's memory while protecting both Emma and the solemn-faced boy whose photo had revealed such desperate loneliness? The helicopter's engines grew louder, their rhythmic thunder a countdown to decision. Isabella dressed Emma in traveling clothes, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind raced through implications and consequences and possibilities. In 3 days, she would know if Lorenzo could become family, if this impossible situation could transform into something worth the risks. In 3 days, she would stand at another crossroads, but this time with information rather than desperation guiding her choice. Victor waited by the helicopter, his hand extended to help her board, his eyes holding a question he wouldn't voice. Isabella took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of violence alongside the gentleness with which he steadied her. Emma laughed as the helicopter lifted, delighted by the sensation of flight, unaware that her mother was flying toward a decision that would define both their futures. Below them, Thornton Manor grew smaller, its fortress walls and careful securities becoming toys from this height. And ahead, somewhere in Switzerland, a lonely boy waited to meet the woman who might save him, or might walk away and leave him to face his father's legacy alone.